What if everything you've been told about men and emotions is completely wrong? What if the reason he hasn't confessed his feelings isn't because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much? Here's the uncomfortable truth most relationship advice won't tell you. When a man becomes emotionally addicted to you, his silence isn't rejection, it's survival. He's not playing games. He's protecting himself from a dependency so intense it terrifies him. Because here's what no one talks about. Emotional addiction in men doesn't look like the movies. It doesn't show up as grand romantic gestures or passionate declarations. It hides behind walls, masks itself as indifference, and reveals itself only through patterns he can't control, even when he desperately tries. In today's video, we're exposing the 6 undeniable signs that prove you've become more than just someone he likes. You've become his emotional fix, the person his mind returns to when the world goes quiet, the presence his nervous system craves without his permission. These aren't the surface level signals everyone talks about. No simple "he compliments you" nonsense. We're diving into the psychological patterns, the behavioral contradictions, and the involuntary responses that expose his deepest emotional dependency. Because here's what makes this different. Emotional addiction operates below conscious awareness. His logical mind might not even understand what's happening, but his instincts, his energy, and his choices betray him every single time. By the end of this video, you'll understand the hidden psychology of male emotional dependency, recognize the exact patterns that reveal his unspoken attachment, and know whether you've crossed from interest into necessity in his emotional world. So stay with me until the very end, because what you're about to discover will change how you interpret every interaction, very silence, and every inconsistency in his behavior. Let's reveal the addiction he'll never admit, but his actions can't deny. Here's what most people misunderstand about emotional addiction. It's not the same as love, and it's not the same as simple attraction. It exists in a space between need and desire, between comfort and chaos. And when a man experiences this with someone, his entire behavioral system starts operating differently without him consciously choosing it. The challenge with men specifically is how they're conditioned to process emotional dependency. From childhood, most men learn to associate emotional need with weakness. Vulnerability becomes something to manage, not express. Control becomes safety. So when someone enters their life who disrupts that control, who becomes essential to their emotional regulation, it triggers an internal conflict they rarely know how to navigate. Think of it this way. Emotional addiction means you've become part of his baseline emotional state. You're not just someone who makes him happy. You're someone whose absence creates discomfort, whose presence regulates his nervous system, whose energy he's unconsciously learned to depend on. And that dependency, it scares him more than almost anything else. Why? Because addiction implies loss of control. It means admitting that someone else has access to his emotional stability, that he's vulnerable, that he needs you in ways that feel dangerous to acknowledge. Psychology shows us that emotional addiction activates the same neural pathways as substance dependency. The brain releases dopamine when you're present, creating a reward response. But more importantly, your absence triggers cortisol and mild withdrawal symptoms, restlessness, irritability, preoccupation. His mind literally seeks you out to restore chemical balance. This is why his behavior often contradicts his words. His conscious mind might resist the attachment, telling himself he's fine, he doesn't need anyone, he's independent. But his be conscious has already formed the dependency. His actions start revolving around you in ways he doesn't plan. His emotional state begins fluctuating based on your availability. His thoughts return to you in moments of stress, boredom, or uncertainty. And the most fascinating part, he might not even realize it's happening. The addiction builds beneath his awareness, revealing itself only through patterns he can't suppress. Understanding this psychology is critical because when you see these signs, you're not just observing interest or attraction, you're witnessing the involuntary markers of someone whose emotional world has reorganized itself around your presence. And once you know what to look for, the evidence becomes unmistakable. Sign 1. His emotional state mirrors your availability. When you've become someone's emotional addiction, one of the clearest signs emerges in how his mood and energy directly correlate with your accessibility. And here's what makes this so revealing. This isn't something he controls or plans. It's an automatic response that happens beneath his conscious awareness. His emotional baseline has become dependent on your presence in ways that expose themselves through subtle but consistent patterns. You might notice that when you're responsive, engaged, and available, his entire demeanor brightens. His messages carry more energy, his voice sounds lighter, even his body language opens up. But the moment you pull back, become less available, or take longer to respond, something shifts. Not in an obvious way, not in a dramatic meltdown, but in the quiet deterioration of his mood. He becomes slightly more withdrawn, a little more irritable, less enthusiastic about things that normally excite him. What's happening here is fascinating. When someone becomes emotionally addicted to you, you become an external regulator of their internal emotional state. Your attention provides dopamine hits that his brain has learned to expect. Your engagement creates feelings of security and validation that stabilize his nervous system. So when that source becomes unavailable, even temporarily, his brain experiences it as deprivation. Science explains this through attachment theory and neurochemical dependency. When someone forms a deep emotional attachment, the brain creates neural pathways that associate the person with emotional regulation. You become tied to his sense of well-being. That's why your availability doesn't just affect how much he enjoys his day. It affects his fundamental emotional state, whether he feels settled or unsettled, content or restless, focused or distracted. And here's the critical distinction. This goes beyond just missing someone or wanting to talk. Men who are simply interested might prefer your company, but their emotional stability doesn't depend on it. But when you're his addiction, your absence creates a low-grade emotional discomfort he can't quite name. He just knows something feels off when you're not accessible, and something clicks back into place when you are. You'll see this pattern repeat over time. After you've been distant or unavailable, suddenly he reaches out more. He finds reasons to connect, not because he's needy in an obvious way, but because his emotional system is seeking balance, and you've become the source of that balance. His mood lifts when you respond. His energy settles when you engage. These aren't coincidences. They're the signatures of dependency. What makes this even more powerful is when this pattern contradicts his personality. Maybe he's usually even-tempered, stable, and unbothered by external circumstances. With you, his emotional state becomes more reactive to your level of engagement. That contrast reveals that you've penetrated a layer of his emotional world that normally remains untouched. If you start tracking this pattern, you'll see it clearly. His emotional stability has become intertwined with your presence. And that's not simple attraction. That's addiction operating at a level he can't control. But as revealing as this pattern is, the next sign goes even deeper. Because when emotional addiction sets in, the space between your interactions reveals his dependency in undeniable ways. Sign 2, he fills the gaps between your interactions with traces of you. When a man is emotionally addicted to you, one of the most telling signs appears in how he handles the space between your actual interactions. And here's the thing, he doesn't just wait for the next time he'll see you. He unconsciously fills those gaps with reminders, references, and traces of you. His mind seeks you out even when you're not there. You'll notice it in strange, specific ways. Maybe he sends you something completely random. A song that reminded him of you, an article about a topic you mentioned weeks ago, a meme about an inside joke you barely remember making. These aren't strategic moves to keep your attention. They're involuntary leaks from a mind that's been running background processes about you constantly. He stumbled across something and his first instinct was you. That's addiction speaking. Or maybe you see it in how he references past conversations in unexpected moments. Weeks later, he brings up something you said in passing, weaving it into a completely unrelated discussion. His brain has been replaying your interactions, cataloging details, holding on to fragments of your presence to sustain him between the real thing. That's what emotional dependency does. It keeps the person alive in your mind, even in their physical absence. Psychology explains this through what researchers call intrusive thought patterns. When someone becomes addicted to another person emotionally, their brain creates a mental shortcut. Anything that remotely connects to you triggers an automatic thought spiral. These aren't deliberate thoughts. They're automatic associations his brain has formed because you've become emotionally significant enough to occupy mental real estate. What makes this even more fascinating is how he tries to rationalize it. He'll find logical reasons to reach out. Oh, I just thought you'd find this interesting. But the truth beneath those explanations, his mind was seeking connection and his subconscious manufactured a justification. The real motive isn't sharing information, it's maintaining the thread of connection because his emotional system craves continuity with you. And here's what separates this from normal interest. Most people think about someone they like occasionally, but emotional addiction creates frequency, consistency, patterns. It's not just that he thinks of you sometimes, it's that traces of you appear in multiple areas of his life repeatedly. His music choices start reflecting your taste. His weekend activities suddenly align with things you've mentioned enjoying. His language adopts phrases you use. His brain is integrating you into his default patterns because you've become part of his emotional operating system. If you notice him filling the spaces between your interactions with reminders of you, random connections, callbacks to past conversations, pay attention, that's not just interest, that's a mind that's organized itself around your presence. But as powerful as this pattern is, the next sign reveals something even more raw, because emotional addiction changes how his body responds to you in ways he absolutely cannot fake. Sign 3, his body language betrays him in ways he can't control. Here's something most people don't realize about emotional addiction. It's not just mental, it's physical. When you've become someone's emotional fix, their body starts responding to you in ways that bypass conscious control entirely. And these physical reactions are some of the most honest indicators you'll ever find because the body doesn't lie. You'll see it first in his nervous system activation whenever you're near. Maybe his breathing pattern shifts slightly. Maybe you notice his hands moving more, fidgeting with objects, adjusting clothing. These aren't random nervous habits. They're signs of heightened emotional arousal. His sympathetic nervous system is activating because your presence triggers a chemical cascade he can't control. Science shows that when we're around someone we're emotionally dependent on, our body releases a cocktail of neurochemicals. Dopamine creates anticipation, oxytocin builds attachment, but simultaneously adrenaline and cortisol spike because vulnerability feels threatening. His body is literally experiencing excitement and anxiety at the same time. Watch his face when you enter a room or when your name comes up. There's often a micro expression lasting less than a second that flashes before his controlled expression settles. Maybe his eyes widen slightly. Maybe his jaw tenses. Maybe a brief smile crosses his face before he neutralizes it. These micro expressions are involuntary emotional leaks. His face is reacting before his conscious mind can censor the response. Another powerful indicator is how his voice changes. When someone is emotionally addicted to you, their tone often shifts in subtle but consistent ways. Maybe it softens when addressing you directly, dropping in volume as if creating intimacy. Maybe it rises slightly in pitch when you surprise him. These vocal shifts are unconscious modulations that happen because you affect him at a level deeper than social interaction. Then there's eye contact, one of the most revealing behavioral markers. A man who sees you as his emotional addiction often has a complicated relationship with looking into your eyes. Sometimes he'll hold your gaze a second too long. Other times he'll avoid your eyes entirely because the connection feels so intense. That push and pull tension is one of the strongest signs of hidden dependency. You might also notice changes in how he manages physical proximity. When someone is emotionally addicted to you, their body instinctively seeks closeness, but also sometimes retreats when intensity becomes overwhelming. One moment he's gravitating toward your space, leaning in, orienting his body fully toward you. The next moment he's creating distance. That push-pull is his system oscillating between craving connection and feeling overwhelmed by how much it affects him. These physical responses are consistent. They form patterns. His body keeps reacting to you in the same involuntary ways because the emotional dependency is constant. He might master his words. He might control his actions, but he cannot fully control his autonomic nervous system or his involuntary physical responses. If you observe these patterns, you're witnessing something beyond attraction. You're seeing the physical footprint of emotional dependency. But as honest as the body is, the next sign reveals something even more telling. Because when you're someone's emotional addiction, you infiltrate their future in ways that expose just how deeply embedded you've become. Sign 4. You become integrated into his future without him realizing it. When emotional addiction sets in, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop being someone in his present and start appearing in his future. And here's what makes this so significant. He doesn't make a conscious decision to include you. His mind automatically starts building future scenarios with you in them, as if your presence in his life is now assumed, not questioned. You'll hear it in how he talks about upcoming events. Maybe he mentions something happening next month and says we should go before catching himself. Maybe he references a future goal and unconsciously frames it with you included. These aren't carefully thought out invitations. They're slips that reveal what his subconscious has already decided. You're part of his future landscape now. This also shows up in how he seeks your input on decisions that technically don't involve you. Maybe he's choosing between job opportunities and asks your opinion as if your perspective carries weight in his life direction. What's happening is that you've become an internal voice in his decision-making process. Your potential reaction, your imagined response, your values have become factors he considers automatically. Psychology calls this future-oriented attachment, and it's one of the clearest markers of emotional addiction. When someone becomes essential to your emotional world, your brain starts constructing future scenarios with them as a constant variable. His mind has categorized you as a permanent fixture, and now when he thinks ahead, you're just there. You'll also notice this in the questions he asks. They stop being about the present and start probing the future. What do you see yourself doing in 5 years? Where would you want to live eventually? His brain is gathering information, mapping compatibility, testing whether the future he's imagining with you in it is realistic. Another way this manifests is through his reaction to anything that threatens your availability. Maybe you mention considering moving to another city and he immediately offers reasons why you shouldn't. Maybe you talk about getting serious with someone else. And he subtly undermines it or withdraws emotionally. His subconscious has planned a future with you accessible, and anything that jeopardizes that access triggers resistance. And here's the thing, he might not even be aware it's happening. That's because the integration happened automatically. Emotional addiction rewires how the brain constructs future narratives, and you've become a default presence in his. If you notice yourself appearing in his future plans, if his language keeps slipping into we instead of I, if he seeks your opinion on things that don't involve you, pay attention. You've become someone his mind assumes will be there later. But as deep as this pattern runs, the next sign exposes something even more vulnerable. Because when you're someone's emotional addiction, his emotional honesty starts leaking through in moments he doesn't plan or control. Sign 5. He reveals unfiltered vulnerability in unguarded moments. One of the most powerful signs of emotional addiction appears in moments when his guard drops completely, and suddenly you see a version of him no one else gets to witness. And here's what's critical. These aren't planned moments of vulnerability. They're accidents, slips that happen when he's too tired, too overwhelmed, or too comfortable to maintain his usual defenses. Maybe it happens late at night when exhaustion lowers his filters. Suddenly he's telling you things he never shares, old wounds he carries, fears that keep him awake, dreams he doesn't admit to anyone. And in the morning, he might even regret how much he said, pulling back slightly. But that late night honesty wasn't calculated. It emerged because in that moment, his need for connection with you overpowered his need for protection. Or maybe it happens during stress. When life pressures mount and his usual coping mechanisms aren't enough, he turns to you, not for solutions necessarily, just for presence, for the emotional regulation your company provides. And in those moments, he admits things. I don't know what I'd do without you. Your child... The only person who gets this, these aren't romantic confessions, they're dependency confessions. Psychology shows that emotional addiction creates what's called selective vulnerability. The person doesn't open up to everyone, but with the source of their addiction, the walls become permeable. They can't help but let things slip because the need for authentic connection overrides their usual controls. You'll see it in the questions he asks during these unguarded moments, deep questions. Real questions. Do you think I'm doing okay? What do you honestly think of how I handle things? He's seeking validation from you specifically because your opinion has become disproportionately important to his self-perception. What makes these moments so revealing is the contrast. In public, around others, he maintains composure. He's in control, measured, guarded, but alone with you, something shifts. The controlled version cracks, and suddenly you're seeing raw humanity, that selective vulnerability, that inconsistency between how he is with others versus with you. That's the signature of dependency. Sometimes this vulnerability comes through in confessions about the connection itself. I don't know what this is, but I don't want to lose it. You mean more to me than I know how to say. These admissions slip out because the addiction creates internal pressure, and occasionally that pressure releases through unexpected honesty. If you notice him revealing parts of himself in unguarded moments that he quickly tries to take back, if his emotional honesty emerges when defenses are down, you're witnessing addiction in action. But as intimate as these vulnerable moments are, the final sign reveals the ultimate proof, because when you've truly become his fix, one specific behavior emerges that leaves absolutely no room for doubt. Sign 6. His stability becomes dependent on your emotional state. The ultimate sign of emotional addiction, the pattern that confirms without question that you've become his fix, appears in how his emotional stability begins depending on yours. And here's what makes this the most powerful indicator. It's not about him reacting to your availability anymore. It's deeper. His internal emotional state starts mirroring yours. When you're upset, he becomes unsettled. When you're distant, he struggles. When you're happy, he stabilizes. Your emotional weather has become his emotional weather. You'll notice this in how he responds when you're going through something difficult. If you're stressed, sad, or overwhelmed, he doesn't just offer support. He absorbs it. Your pain becomes his discomfort. He can't fully relax when he knows you're not okay. And this goes beyond empathy. His emotional baseline shifts downward when yours does, because you've become so integrated into his emotional regulation. Maybe you've had a bad day, and even though he's not the cause and can't fix it, he becomes visibly agitated, restless. He keeps checking in, asking if you're all right, not because he's trying to be helpful, but because your emotional discomfort is creating genuine distress in him. When someone becomes emotionally addicted to another person, their emotional states become entangled. On the flip side, watch what happens when you're genuinely happy, peaceful, or thriving. His entire demeanor lifts. He seems lighter, more at ease, more content, not just because he's happy for you, but because your positive state allows him to feel stable. You've become his emotional barometer. When you're good, he can be good. When you're not, his internal world becomes destabilized. Science explains this through co-regulation, the process by which two nervous systems influence each other in healthy connects. TIAN's co-regulation happens mutually and temporarily, but in emotional addiction, it becomes one-sided and constant. His nervous system has become dependent on yours for regulation. Your calm calms him. Your chaos destabilizes him. You might also notice him becoming hyper-attuned to your emotional shifts. He picks up on changes in your mood before you've said anything. A slight change in your tone, your energy, your body language, and he's immediately asking what's wrong. His system has learned to monitor yours because his stability depends on understanding and responding to your state. What makes this sign the ultimate proof is its consistency and its depth. Surface level attraction doesn't create this level of emotional entanglement. Casual interest doesn't make someone's happiness dependent on yours, but emotional addiction does. When someone becomes your fix, your emotional state stops being separate from theirs. If you notice him becoming unsettled when you're upset, stabilizing when you're happy, hyper-attuned to your emotional shifts, you're seeing the ultimate sign. You're not just someone he cares about. You're someone his emotional system has become dependent on. That's addiction in its purest form. So there you have it. 6 undeniable signs that prove you've become his emotional addiction. The person his system craves, depends on, and organizes itself around, even when his words won't admit it. And now you have something most people never get: clarity, understanding, the ability to see beneath the surface and recognize dependency patterns most never notice. Here's what I want you to remember. Emotional addiction in men is real, it's intense, and it's often completely unconscious. He's not playing games when he can't articulate his feelings. He's navigating an internal dependency that terrifies him. But his behavior tells the truth, his words can't. The mirroring of your availability, the way he fills gaps with traces of you, his body language he can't fake, how you appear in his future. The vulnerability that leaks through unguarded moments, and how his stability becomes tied to your emotional state. These aren't coincidences, they're patterns, involuntary reveals of a dependency operating beneath conscious control. And understanding these signs is about you recognizing your impact, your value, and the effect you have on someone at levels deeper than words can express. Before you go, I want to invite you to go deeper with me. If this video gave you insights you didn't have before, imagine what you'll discover when we explore more about emotional patterns and the unspoken dynamics that drive connections. I create content every week about attraction, dependency, and emotional connection. So if you found value here, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you noticed these signs in someone? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one, and your experience might help someone else recognize what they're going through. Remember, emotional addiction isn't